Alright, today I'm going to talk about passages on the SATs, and a lot of kids ask me, how can I get better on the reading comprehension section of the SATs? And you know what, to be, 100% honest, it's really, really difficult. It's not like writing, because writing, if you pick up, the 18 or so grammar concepts, depending on how you break it down, your score will improve dramatically. I mean, absolutely quickly. But reading really does not increase fast, and there's a reason for that. Because reading, it takes a lot, right? Writing is very much like grammar. I mean, very much like math, because you follow the rules, you'll get better, right? And the average scores for I don't know what you guys know, the average score as being, but average score is actually quite low for all the sections. It's about 500 for each section, right? 500 for on average for each section. I actually think the lowest scoring section of the SATs is the writing section, surprisingly, not reading. Okay, reading is actually in the middle. Math is the highest average for the SATs, or has the highest average. I've been teaching reading and writing both for a really, really long time, and what I notice is kids ask me the same questions every year, and they ask me, should I read the questions first? Or, should I go from one part over here and then answer the, pertinent question right next to it, right? And the thing is, I hate giving this type of answer, but there is no one method that's going to fit everybody. Everybody approaches it differently. A lot of people like to do, read this part and then go directly answer another part, but I think there's a problem with that. Or they like to go through all the questions first, right, really quickly, and then go read, right? And sometimes they don't read the whole thing. The method I recommend is you read everything first. Read everything first, unless you don't understand the question, understand the passage at all, right? Read everything first really carefully, but quickly, and then go do the questions as best as possible. A lot of kids, what ends up happening is they can solve the questions, right, with time. If they have enough time, they can solve the questions very well, but it's a matter of time. Here's the thing: if you can do it without a time limit, that means you really can't do it. You just need more practice, right? Because when you're starting anything, right, you're really slow, you're not fast, and people naturally don't want to do things they're not good at. But once you do it more and more and more frequently, it almost becomes instinctive, and then it will get easier. You just need a lot of practice. And the reason why the SAT reading scores are so low is because people are just not, or students are just not doing enough critical reading, right? So back to solving the SAT passages, or just reading. If you get a science passage, right, another hint is you could read up top, right? Read up top. And so one way of doing it, one way of approaching a science passage, I'm going to talk about different passages. Science passages that you could read the first paragraph up here. You can read the first paragraph. Say, for instance, you have a science passage. Science passages, I think, are easier to do because it's kind of straightforward. Very often, science passages, they give you, let's say this is a passage, just assume, right? And these are paragraphs, okay? Science passages are straightforward because in the introduction, right? Let's say this is a paragraph. In the introduction, they give you a general, idea of what they're going to talk about, right? It's an introduction, and then let's say they argue or they present an idea, and in the last paragraph they summarize what they said, right? So let's say you're reading a science passage, you have no idea what they're talking about. You could read the beginning and the end, and then you'll probably get a main idea what the author is arguing about, right? But that only works with science passages, because if you have a narrative, let's say you have a narrative, and narrative is basically storytelling. You can't do that because there's a beginning and there's an end, and then there's a flow to the writing, right? So it really depends on the types of passages you get. That's why I keep emphasizing that there is no one way to solve everything. There is no such thing, right? And once you get enough exposure to all the different types of SAT passages, then you'll be more familiar with how you should approach each reading passage. And the SAT talks about a variety of stuff. They talk about string theory, they talk about jazz and jazz history, rock and roll. I actually think there's a pretty prevalent passage about, file sharing, right? If it's right or wrong. But they mentioned Napster. I don't know if you guys know what Napster is, but they mentioned Napster, dinosaurs, why yo-yos became popular, or they are popular every 10 years. They talk about the Mona Lisa. There are many things to cover, and I recommend reading a lot. That's why kids who have had a good habit of reading in the past, it's not as hard for them, because once they pick up a certain amount of core vocabulary they SAT emphasizes, then they're right above the 700 level, right? Meaning they really don't get that many wrong. So it's a matter of reading a lot and knowing the many different ways of using the vocabulary words. And I know it's difficult because there are so many words, right? I think there's over 500,000 words, and that does not include jargon, right? So let's look at this one, and I'll go through this. This is actually a part of a passage, but I'll go through, give you some memos while I'm reading what I do, right? And some of the things that you should note and know, and then I'll explain the questions on how you can do the answers. All right, so let's look at this one. This passage is about wine. It is undoubtedly true that most alcoholic beverages have negative physiological effects. For example, alcohol is known to raise the body's body levels of lipids, fats, cholesterol, waxes, sterols, etc., which play a considerable role in the development of premature heart disease. But a recent group of scientists has found non-harmful effects of moderate wine consumption. In particular, they found that alcohol enters the bloodstream much slower when individuals drink wine than when they drink equal quantities of beer or liquor. In addition, they also discovered that the rate of death from premature heart disease in Europe dropped significantly as the rate of moderate wine consumption increased. Skeptics have pointed out other factors, such as increasing levels of exercise and improvements in medical technology, to account for this phenomenon. But their argument cannot explain why the rates of death from premature heart disease have fallen in other areas of high wine consumption that have below average levels of physical fitness and medical technology. So this is a perfect passage to explain so many different things, right? I'll start from the beginning. It says it is undoubtedly true that alcohol is bad. So what it's saying right now, to start, they're setting up the argument saying most people think alcohol is bad, right? Alcohol is bad, and people assume that it's undoubtable. It's undoubtable that's true, right? It has negative physiological. Physiological doesn't mean psychological. Psychological has to do with the mind. Physiological has to do with the body, right? So if you're a physicist, you deal with physics and what's it called, E equals mc squared and so on. But if you're a physiologist, you're basically a doctor, right? That's why you have physicians, not physicists, right? For example, it says alcohol is known to raise lipids, so it can't be a good thing. And they give you examples of this. SAT will give you questions like this too. What are the points of these things, right? And they give you an adverbial phrase over here, for example. And the example is talking about what? What is it talking about? It's talking about the negative effects, right? Negative effects. And they're giving examples of the effects. Okay? And what do? They cause heart disease, premature heart disease. Now here's the contrast. Here's the shift. And this is a hint word. It says but. But a recent group of scientists means it's contrasting whatever they set up over here. And this is a way of writing. You're setting up you give the general consensus and then you give a counter argument. And that's what's exactly happening over here. Okay? And then it explains how wine is actually not as bad. And then they give you another transition over here. It says, in addition, okay, it's also reducing premature heart failure or heart disease. Here's another part that's actually really, really important too, though. Skeptics. And this is a word that if you don't know, learn it now. Skeptics are people who are what? Skeptical. They're doubting it, right? So they're arguing against whatever the author is posing. Okay, so skeptics have pointed out other factors such as increased level of exercise and improvements in medical technology. So skeptics are saying, no, it's not because of wine that's doing the benefit. It's because medicine has gotten better and people exercise more, right? But then after this, the author gives another counterargument saying that, hey, okay, if that's all true, how come, it did, high wine level consumption didn't really affect people who exercised or didn't exercise, right? That's what I mean to say, didn't exercise. So in short, what it's saying is that yes, wine actually did help, right? And that's the argument. So this is a classic passage because it's giving you all these counter arguments and everything else. What I also want to note is this part over here, phenomenon. Whenever they give you this word phenomenon in an answer choice or within the passage, all you have to do is find out what the phenomenon is, right? In this case, the phenomenon is what? How alcohol, specifically wine, not beer and liquor, is reducing heart disease or premature heart disease, right? So go find words that are very, very ambiguous and then define it within the context of the passage. So effects was what? What are the effects? These effects, right? Phenomenon is what? What is phenomenon? Reducing heart disease, right? So let's look at the question. In the sentence in lines 24 to 31, skeptics to medical technology primarily serve to do what? What is the point of this part over here? Where was it? Skeptics have pointed out other factors such as levels of exercise and improvements in technology account for phenomenon, but their arguments cannot explain why the death from premature heart disease have fallen, right? What is the point of this? So they're skeptics and then he's countering it, right? I explained that before. So it's primarily, what is the main reason for this? To acknowledge the existence of skeptics, say that there are skeptics out there. Is that the main point? No, it's to set up the argument against it, right? What about B? Negate skeptics' point of view, saying we're going to cancel what they think. Point of view. And what is their point of view? Their point of view is that no, wine doesn't help, right? Wine doesn't help. I don't know why this is acting up. Right? That's the view. I actually think this is answer, but we'll come back. What about C? Support the validity of the skeptic's point of view. Well, support the validity. Valid means, I argue, I agree with this argument. But the author is not supporting the skeptic, so it can't be C. What about D? Challenge is good, right? Challenge the skeptics. Veracity of the research. Author, skeptics, yes, are saying I don't agree. But sentence, what is the purpose of the sentence? Saying that the research is wrong? No. It's not saying the truthfulness or how believable the research is, right? Skeptics is there to set up the counter argument so the author can say, no, these people are wrong. In the end, it says that right over here, right? What about E? Need for further research. I'm sure this is correct. Remember, the SAT will give you a really, really good answer, but sometimes even the answer is correct, it's not the answer because they may not be asking that, and that's the case over here. So the best answer is actually B, right? Is canceling the skeptic's point of view, right? Canceling what the skeptics think, because what happened? Even people who didn't exercise, their premature heart failure rate actually still went down, right? So this is a perfect example. Just what I want you to take away from this is when they give you something like view or view research, whatever research is, go find out what that research is and deduce the answer from that, right? And look at the transitions. The transitions really, really give you a hint to, what the author thinks. So if they give you like but, right? They give you adverbial conjunction, it means it's a contrast. You should know that. In addition means what? You're adding more to it, right? And when they give you something like phenomenon, what is the phenomenon? Just go define it and try to do it in that context, which goes hand in hand with the idea of prepositional phrases, okay? Prepositional phrases are basically things that start with of something. So like let's say, the Bank of Korea. Well, I guess that would be a prepositional phrase, but what I'm trying to show to you is that you could get rid of the prepositional phrase and then find out that the main idea is really bank, right?